Today we're talking about evolution, and before I get there, I want to share my name is Justin Craig, and welcome to everybody who's watching online across the Northwest Atlanta area. Of course, we hope you won't stop on there, just kind of staying online, but hopefully you'll decide to come in live. Nothing beats the physical. Physical stores will never fully go away, no matter how much Amazon grows. I promise you, we will all still need some physical stores. Many of them will go out of business, but the physical will never go away. The church, part of our humanity is that we are also made physical. And so coming and being a part of the community of God, that will never change as much as we'll use technology and leverage technology to advance the kingdom. We don't want to communicate that it will ever be digital only. Part of humanity is physical. So while you're there, would you just chat it up? Ask questions, talk about it. It helps people who are first-time guests online connect, and we're really trying to build a digital community online. So if you'd help us do that, if you call Vinings Church home and you're watching in your living room, grab the person who has the laptop, or if you're casting with your phone, would you just type in there and say, hey, I'm watching from Mableton, I'm watching from Marietta, watching from Smyrna, and help others connect by asking questions. You also have the notes there on the app, and that goes for all of you here who are live. We have the notes right there on the app. You can just download the app in any app store, and the notes are right there. So you can actually write all of your notes that you want to, if you don't want to write down what's on the slides, in between all of the things that we put on the slides here. So welcome. I'm glad that you guys are here, and we're continuing our cow tipping series. And it's been really fun as we've talked about topics that the church really doesn't talk about very often. We're kind of tipping sacred cows here. This isn't Chick-fil-A. This is actually church. All the mooing kind of put you in the Chick-fil-A spirit. And no, you can't have Chick-fil-A on your way home today if you're starting to, if it's prompting your taste buds. You got to wait till Monday. But this is cow tipping, and we are tipping cows in the church that the church typically doesn't talk about. And we're talking today about evolution. And we get a lot of questions about the evidence of God and for or against evolutionary theory. Can I be a Christian and be an evolutionist? This is an important topic. And many of you guys turned in your questions and sent in your questions, and you asked these kinds of questions. So we thought it would be very important for us to talk about this. The only thing is, I actually talk about this relatively often, believe it or not. If you're a brand new person to Vinings Church, you're like, well, you haven't talked about it since I've been here. Well, then you've come in the last 2 years. 2 years ago, I did a series called Evidence, and we talked about this very topic. And I pulled out the stops. I brought all kinds of props and illustrations, and we talked about macro and micro evolution and the difference between the two, and we talked about entropy and how things naturally left to themselves move toward disorder. That is a law. It is the second law of thermodynamics. Many of us who are, approach our faith intellectually, we know about laws, we know about principles, and listen, it's a principle. If things are left to themselves, they will naturally decay. If I had a piece of cardboard here or something, laying here, you give it 1,000 years, it will move toward disorder, it will decay, it will turn into dust. So there has to be an intervener for order to exist, for things to move from disorder to order. And so this is in the face of macroevolution. It's important for you to understand the difference between micro and macro evolution. And microevolution is absolutely true. In microevolution, this is important for you to get this talk. I'm not going to go back through it all today. I want you to watch a video here in a second. But microevolution is just simply a species' ability to adapt to its own environment. And so right now, currently, your blood is thickening as we move into winter. As things get colder in the winter time, it's adapting to the colder temperatures, whereas it adapted over the springtime toward a more thinner blood. You microevolutionarily evolved over the course of this year, and your body adapted to the warmer temperatures in the spring, and it adapts to the colder temperatures. But that is not to be mistaken for macroevolution, the change of species from one species to another. And what we talk about in this talk, and again, you need to get it, and I talked about it 5 years ago in a series called Evidence. We talk about this with regularity, is that unless you were there at creation, or unless you've been there at a macroevolutionary shift of a species and saw it happen, you and I are left to look at the evidence. That's all we have. We can't prove anything with 100% certainty. And atheists, we get to the end of these talks, and atheists and those who are maybe not convinced that God exists or that God can be trusted or we should listen to God through the Bible, they get to the end of this and they get angry at me. And they get angry because I've said you have faith. Because when each of us, both of us, Christian and non-Christian, are left to look at the evidence, okay? The evidence will only take you so far, proving God or disproving God. Whether that's 20% satisfaction or 60% satisfaction or 80% satisfaction. And there will be a gap between where the evidence takes you and certainty. And you fill that gap with faith. I fill that gap with faith. Atheists hate hearing that. And so I've approached this topic over and over again, and really I just kind of make them angry, and that's not my intention, and I don't ever want to make anybody angry. We're trying to connect here over this God who loves us so much. So I'm not going to approach our talk that way. If you want to hear macro and microevolution, if you want to hear an explanation of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, please look up that talk. What I want to do today is approach this entirely differently in our time together. I'd like to show you a video from a different voice so that you're not hearing the same voice. And I didn't want to repeat the talk too. I started to imagine repeating the talk, and I was like, well, what about those people who've been with us for 2 years or 5 years and you've heard this talk before? I want to build on what we've talked about as it relates to evolution. And I'd like for you to hear from a different voice today, a guy named Cliff Kingsley. And he's a renowned apologist. I didn't want you to hear from Ravi Zacharias or William Lane Craig or Josh McDowell, some of the voices that we're familiar with. But he is an intellectual and scientifically renowned, very famous apologist for the Christian faith and enters into debates, a lot of debates with atheists. One of the things that he likes to do is he likes to go to college campuses and he'll speak with college students who are skeptics, who are struggling with faith. And he'll, in a very winsome kind of way, although there's moments of tension in this video, but in a winsome way, help them understand that, look, you have faith, just like I have faith, and we're both left to look at the evidence. So I'd like you to prepare for a 10-minute video. It's kind of long, and it's different for what we do here at Vinings Church. And then I'm going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes afterwards to follow up. Please take a look at the screens and Cliff Kingsley.
Can you prove to me God exists? And
Sure.
Can you prove to me that the Christian God is quote unquote the right God?
You bet. I will prove to you that God exists if you first prove to me that I'm not just a bad dream you're having right now.
I can't prove that.
Thank you. I will prove to you that God exists if you first prove to me that your taste buds tell you the truth that the milk is sour. Can you prove that?
Can't prove that.
I will prove to you that God exists if you first prove to me that your eyesight really perceives reality. Can you prove that?
Can't prove it.
Thank you.
And why
and
does
what
the
on
Bible
earth are you
say?
doing asking me to prove God exists? Because you know there's no way that I could ever prove that God exists.
Can you give me a good argument for it without using the Bible or quoting Jesus?
You bet. Thank you. Great. Yes, I can answer the question. What is the evidence, not the proof, but the evidence that God exists? The evidence that God exists, I'll give you 11 pieces of evidence, okay? First one, order and design point to an intelligent mind. The order and design of the cosmos points to an intelligent mind.
How?
You and I are standing at the foot of Mount Rushmore. As we're standing there, I turn to you and say, hey, isn't it incredible the way the water just dripped over the rock face? Hey, it's George Washington up there. Wow, it's Teddy Roosevelt. Isn't it amazing the way the water, by accident, just carved out those heads on Mount Rushmore?
It doesn't show anything.
Yeah, it shows.
It just shows that we happen to be an intelligent byproduct of evolution.
No, you don't get order and design by chance, sir. Order and design point to a designer. Designer genes demand a designer.
This guy's good. He's good. I don't like him, but he's good.
All right.
It's very simple. Second point. The universe is eternal. No, it's not. There's a Big Bang. So the universe is not eternal. The universe has a beginning. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a beginning, therefore the universe has a cause. The best explanation is an uncaused cause. That's God. Third piece of evidence for God's existence, the anthropic principle. Life is balanced on a razor's edge. There are so many ingredients that go into allowing this earth to sustain life that it ain't no accident, sir. It's got to be an intelligent mind. If the Earth was a little closer to the sun, we'd all fry. If the Earth was a little further from the sun, we'd all freeze.
Well, I mean, the galaxy is huge. I mean, chance says that, like, there will be a terrestrial planet at some point that just happens to be in the right location, that's perfectly around the sun, and, like...
Point 4, the amount of information densely packed into the DNA of a single cell demands an intelligent mind. Every time you are confronted by densely packed information, there's got to be an intelligent mind.
I feel like 3 of the points you've given me are just, like, astronomical odds, and you're just quoting God as proof, because, like, it's just an easy way out.
Why'd you use the word proof?
Not proof.
Evidence.
Evidence.
There we go. Good.
He's really.
5th point.
I'm sorry. I don't like it.
Charles Darwin pointed out that if something is irreducibly complex, the whole idea of evolution by chance and fate falls apart. I think there are more than enough examples of things that are irreducibly complex, as Michael Behe points out, the biochemist at Lehigh. Irreducible complexity shows that you cannot go from this stage to this stage to this stage to this stage, because in between, if that is missing, that never happens.
What?
Mousetrap, slab of wood, spring, hammer. You cannot evolve a mousetrap from a slab of wood. Mousetrap, slab of wood, and hammer. You cannot evolve from that a mousetrap, because a mousetrap doesn't catch any mice if it's just a slab of wood, or if it's a slab of wood and a hammer. It's irreducibly complex. You have to have the slab of wood, the spring, and the hammer. Well, it's the same with the eye. If something's missing out of the eye, it ain't going to work. And there's so many parts of the eye that are necessary in order for an eye to be an eye. It can't go from one little stage to another. Now, the classic example is the living cell. See, a living cell is a living cell is irreducibly complex. It can't go from one stage to another stage to another stage and then suddenly become a living cell. It's irreducibly complex. 6th point is, moral absolutes demand a moral lawgiver. Now, if you believe there are no moral absolutes, you're a moral relativist, then I don't have a point to make.
Okay, and then point 7.
Okay? But I think every atheist friend of mine has moral absolutes. Because every atheist friend of mine looks into the face of the person who abuses children and says, you should not have abused that child. And when my atheist friend uses the word should, they're appealing to a standard outside of us and acting as if it's real. And the only way it can be real is if there is some God to create and define it.
Or society.
7th piece of evidence for the existence of God is love. Our experience of love tells us that there is more to reality than simple matter and energy. There's this innate human being ability that we people have to genuinely care. 8th piece of evidence, is that where we're at, 8?
Right.
8th piece of evidence is rational minds. Your rational mind points to a rational God. Why? Because it's preposterous to believe that the rational comes from the non-rational. It's ludicrous to believe that the rational comes from the irrational. And that's why Charles Darwin in 1883 wrote a letter to a man named Mr. Graham, in which he writes, if it's true that our minds are simply highly developed monkeys' minds, why do we trust them to tell us the truth about reality? Would you trust the thoughts of a monkey? He's struggling with epistemological nihilism. You can't know anything, because your mind is an accident. It comes from the irrational. No, your mind is not an accident. Your mind is so complex, it's amazing. It's far more reasonable to believe that your mind comes from a rational being than it is to believe that your mind comes from the irrational. 9th piece of evidence. You as a human being have an innate drive for meaning in life. You're always attaching meaning to your life, so are we all. The only way there can be meaning is if there is a God who created you for a purpose. No God, life is ultimately meaningless.
I mean, what if someone says there is no meaning to life, or like?
Then I have nothing to say. But you know what? You know what you got to be doing.
Okay.
If life is meaningless, you got to be committing suicide. Because your life is totally insignificant.
I've heard this argument. Okay.
Well, Camus made the argument. Okay. Albert Camus, the great French atheistic existentialist philosopher, said, the only question modern man must answer is, why not commit suicide? Now, maybe you're going to choose not to, fine. But if you're going to genuinely tell me that you don't believe God exists, but you've never seriously considered suicide, you're not being intellectually consistent and honest. That's Camus' point. I agree with him totally.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, so what's the point of a God?
See,
if you
the
believe
innate
in a
drive
God-
for meaning in life is an indicator that God is left within you and within me. You're created for a purpose, and you have this innate drive for meaning and purpose in life. But where does that drive come from? Is there anything to satisfy that drive? 10th piece of evidence for the existence of God is the historical resurrection of Jesus Christ. The historical evidence is he really died, he was really buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, his followers dispersed in despair and disillusionment. 3 days later, he appeared risen from the dead over a period of 40 days to over 500 people who saw him at different times, in different places, risen from the dead. So those are 10 pieces of evidence, not proof, evidence that God exists. That's why I believe God exists.
What was the 11th one?
I forget. There are a slew of other ones, but... All right, here's the 11th one. For me, because I've never seen life come from non-life. And do you know what an atheist is believing? An atheist is someone who believes life comes from non-life. You talk about a blind leap of faith. That has got to be the biggest blind leap of faith I could ever imagine. To believe that life comes from non-life is incredible. Why? Because all of my observation tells me plant life comes from plant life. Animal life comes from animal life. Human life comes from human life. You never once get the animate from the inanimate. Never. But an atheist is someone who says, oh yeah, but there's one exception to all of this, Cliff. In the beginning, life comes from non-life. That's incredible that you could be so naive to believe that. Because all of your experience is life comes from life. Never one time in your experience do you see life come from non-life. Never.
And that last one is really the entropy argument. There requires an intervener, an intelligent person for disorder to go into order. That's life. And what we see is the norm when things are left to themselves. And this answers your questions about the origin of species and macroevolution moving to a superior species. Is things move toward more disorder and more lower intelligence by themselves, i.e. lower intelligence. So again, I encourage you, if you want more after today, and maybe today isn't what you're looking for, please look on our app, please look on our podcasts, on our YouTube channel as well, for the proof series and for the evidence series. And we actually explain a lot of, we discern between the difference between evidence and proof, just like he does. But here's the way I'd like to start our evolution talk today, okay? With that all of kind of that substantiated, and it's very important to get to the intellectualism and the question. I want to ask you this as we kind of start our evolutionary talk today, as we kind of build on that, is what makes a day a good day for you? Have you ever thought about that? What makes a day, I'm going somewhere with this, a good day for you? We decide, based on our own minds and our own intellect, what today, based on our set of criteria, is going to make today a good day. And so we start off our day and we go, okay, this is what I kind of hope and this is what my expectations are. And we get to the end of that day, and if our criteria is met, then it was a good day. If our criteria was not met, or it was less than what our expectations were, then it was a bad day. But what defined the good day? What set the criteria? It was you. It was me. It was our minds. We're the ones who set the criteria for a good day or a bad day. We were the determiner of what is a good day or a bad day. We're about to look at some texts that use the phrase good day, good day, good day, good day, good day. And it was good. That comes from a different person who gives the definition of good and what determines a good day. We're about to look at a text that says there's a who, and there's a somebody that determines who that good is. So I'd like to introduce you. Let's go to the Bible. where there were several consecutive good days that define good. And I want you to see something powerful about the heart of God, and powerful and emotive, and touches us at the emotional level today about these passages that are under so much scrutiny in our 21st century westernized context. Look at this in verse 1. In the beginning, and here's where we place the emphasis. I've put them yellow and the particular words that we place emphasis in our Western context with underlining. Is in the beginning, God, and we blow right over that word, created the heavens and the earth. What you and I, with our 21st century lens that's been heavily influenced by scientists like Darwin, biologists like Darwin, but many others, is we look at a text like Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 as well, and we read it through our worldview and our lens that's given to us by our culture and by the time that we were born in, and that's none of our faults, okay? We just are born in the country that we're born in, with our westernized thinking, and we want the answers to the question of how and when, or in order here, when did he do it in the beginning, and how and when. I want to know, when did you do it? Is this an old earth or a new earth? Because science has given me that we're billions of years old, and this earth is 3.2 billion years old, and the universe is double that, but just about double that. Science has given me that, so now I go into the text and I say, God, you ought to answer when. You ought to match what it is that I've found scientifically. And then I want to know how. How did you do it? Did you do it through evolution? Did you do it through some other means? Or did you just create, kind of speak it, and then boom, it went into existence? Because I want to know how and when. That's the lens through which you and I approach Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. But what if the author wasn't trying to answer those two questions? What if back thousands of years ago, God, who was writing this, for all the cultures that he knew that would existed, and all the countries that he knew that would exist over the course of time, and we're pretty late by the standards of how old this world is, or at least the timeline of humanity. We may be in the middle, we may be late, who knows, but we're kind of post a lot of other people who've lived and a lot of other cultures who've lived. What if he knew that he wanted to add that humans would primarily be asking different questions, and we would only ever get around to the questions of how and when in the 21st century, AD on the western side of the world, because the East is asking different questions. I promise you, Buddhism, cultures that are birthed out of Hinduism and pantheistic thought, they're asking different questions as they approach the Bible, Genesis 1. And they read the Bible over there, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Now, you and I, we look at this and we go, what other questions are there? I mean, any God who's worth his salt or worth following is going to answer the questions when and how, because I am of a higher, superior intelligence. And we've had way higher, scientific development, and we've learned so much, and we've developed, we've found so many formulas. We have evolved to a higher state than we were back in Roman Empire times, or before that in Egyptian times, and we don't give ancient man his due, and we think that we're far superior beings because of all of our intellect, and we say, I'm not going to follow a God who doesn't answer when and how. I mean, give my life over. I only get one shot with this. Give my entire life over to a God who won't answer the questions that I want him to answer. How dare he? And we reject God, and we walk away from these texts, and we walk away from a God who wants to know us in a deep way, and we kind of just say that wonderful, it elicits some emotion that God loves me and wants to know me, but I'm not going to get to know that God because he didn't answer my questions. And what other questions could there be to a creation text outside of when and how? When and how? And if he was smart, and if he was intelligent, and he says he's higher intelligence than me, he would answer when and how. What the text is trying to answer are two completely different questions, because he knew what was in the core of our soul. He knows how he made us. He knows how he designed us. And he knows what questions are way higher priority for you and I to answer. And they're the questions of who and why. Who was it who created it? Why did he create it? If all he answered, listen, if all he answered was when and how, okay? How he did it through evolutionary, macroevolution. And the origin of species, 21 different enzymes with a few, the right mixture with a bolt of lightning hits it, and now we get life, right? Life coming out, order coming out of non-order, right? And that's the origin of species, and then we get the single cell, and then it evolves into more complexity left by itself, more complexity, and it completely goes against the second law of thermodynamics. I'll stop talking about that because that's a talk for another day. But if he answered the question of how he did it, and then he said, look, a day is really not just a 24-hour period. It's actually millions and billions of years, because a day to God is different from a day to a human, which may be the case, and it really might be a right way of reading Genesis 1. But if he answered our how and he answered our when, he answered our how and he answered our when, and he left out answering who and why, guess what we'd be doing? We'd be saying, okay, he did it through evolution, and he did it millions and millions of years ago, but who? I mean, he left out who? What kind of stupid idiot God, right, who wants me to give my entire life to him, some intelligent being way above me, what kind of God would leave out the basic questions of who he is and why, purpose, why he did it? And we'd reject him. See, here's what we need to understand, and here's what you and I need to understand about ourselves. We are fallen, and we are prideful, and we don't want to give ourselves to a God. We don't want to give, we want to be our own gods, and we want to be in charge of our own selves. And we're going to do everything in our power to squirm and kick and push against and find some reason to discredit God. And you and I would look at this text if all he answered was how and when, and we go, yeah, but who? And why did he do it? And why would he leave that out? I'm not going to give my life to him. I mean, he left out the basic questions. And so what we get with Genesis 1 and 2 is the basic question that humanity, you and me, is searching for, and he's answering the question of who and why and who and why. And now you and I live in a Judeo-Christian culture that was founded on Judeo-Christian ethics, and we have those questions answered because we know these texts well, right? Even if you're not a Christian, you know Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 claim that it was God, I am, Yahweh, which is just another way of saying I be, I exist. I'm outside of time, I exist. And he answers this question of why he did it. And we go, yeah, but how and when? Now I'm ready for the 201, or maybe it's 301 or 401. And why did he leave that out? And why didn't he explain all the intricacies of how ape bones go to man bones, and that's how he basically made higher order species? Why doesn't he align with Darwin? Why doesn't he align with my 21st century westernized view of looking at these texts? I'm not going to give myself to him. He doesn't answer my questions, because after all, what other questions are there? And we pridefully, and I say this respectfully, we egotistically impose our view, our worldview, our lens on these texts, and we discredit the very being who's pursuing us, who loves us, and loves us too much to just wander away from him and say, well, they walked away from me, so just forget it. No, he pursues us, and we begin to understand as we see his pursuit throughout all of Genesis to Revelation, a pursuit of a God who's got one purpose in mind only, and that is redemption. We begin to see a heart that I do want to answer your questions. I am going to make myself known, but I will not remove the need for faith. I'm going to give you ample evidence, and I believe as a Christian we have more evidence than atheists do that take us like 85, 90, 95% of the way there. But I will not remove the need for faith because I'm not a God who forces people to believe in me. I'm not a God who forces myself on them. And if I show up, boom, right, now they're forced. No, I don't want robots. I want it to be a choice. I want love to be true love. Love can only be love if two people freely, willingly enter in. And so I will not remove the need for faith. He even makes you this promise. If you'll search for him, truly search for him, not give verbal lip service, but truly search for him. Not with I got all this will and stuff. No, it's a gentle, I'm going to pursue him, and I'm going to move in his direction because I want to know him. If you'll search for me, you'll find me. If you search for me with all your heart, Jeremiah 29:11. And he makes you and I that promise in other places in the Bible as well. I will make sure you find me. I will make sure that you find me. So the questions that he's answering in Genesis 1 and 2 are who and why. Who and why. And so what I'd like to do is read the exact same passage we just read, but I want you to read it through the lens of a person who's coming to the Bible without our 21st century westernized worldview. Can we read that same exact verse? Genesis 1:1, look at this. In the beginning, and what we'd see is God. He identifies himself. A who. We have a who here. In the beginning, God created. What did he create? He created the heavens and the earth. So he didn't evolve, or if he chose to evolve it, I don't think macroevolution necessarily forces you to conclude there is no God. Maybe he created through evolution. If that's where you want to go, that's okay. I don't think it forces you away from the God of the Bible, but that's another talk for another time. But here we get a who, and we get that he created it, meaning what would be the most easiest or simplest understanding of that. He spoke it into existence. And he gives himself a name, and he gives himself the name Yahweh, which means I am, which means I exist, which means I just be. In other words, here's how best to understand me. I am outside of time. I am eternal. It's hard for you to understand or comprehend a being that's never existed out of time because you've always lived in time, but I want you to try as best as you can with our finite minds. It's very difficult for us to grasp this concept. There was no beginning to me. Who created God? That question is nonsensical. It's illogical because I'm eternal. You've missed the very tenet of who I am. I'm outside of time. And time started when I, in eternity, created. And I created, it says, and there was a beginning. Before this, there was no beginning, but I still existed. That's why the most accurate name for me is I am. I exist. I just be. There was no beginning. There is no I exist, presently. There is no I will be in the future. It's I exist for all time. I will always exist. Even when creation's run its course and it's ended time, I will still exist because I am eternal. And I have an infinite mind. And you having a finite mind are trying to understand all of these infinite things. And unless it satisfies your intellect within your finite mind, and you may have the best IQ, I'm not saying you're not smart. But he looks at you and he looks at me and he says, you've set a level of criteria, and in your fallenness, you are searching for a way to discredit me. And you are searching for a reason to not give your life over to me. And you'll find it if you search for it with all your heart. But I'll make you this promise. If you'll search for me, if you just come to me gently, walking humbly, not checking your intellect at the door. I'm very I made you an intellectual being. I want you to engage with your questions and your intellect, but if you'll walk towards me, I will make sure that you find me. I'll make sure you get your questions answered if you search for me with all your heart. And so you and I make an excuse. We look for excuses to reject God. And listen, can I just say this? When I approach this topic, I've mentioned countless times here that, I've done this talk many times on strictly the questions about evolution. And we answer it, we go through it, we just answer all the questions, okay? And you get to the end of it, and my goal isn't to make people who are atheists or evolutionists feel dumb. That's not the goal. They're highly intelligent, and they're highly respected in this message that I've done many times in different versions of. But we get to the end of it, and we're all convinced that, I have faith too, and we convince every atheist in the room is like, okay, yeah, I admit I do have faith, okay? And we get to the end of it, and I kind of, like Cliff did, give all this evidence. There's unbelievable evidence, and I think it takes you further than where atheism does with all the evidence. It's like checkmate. It's like a talk that's like, and checkmate. If I could just say that, humbly and respectfully. It's like, okay, now wouldn't you be ready to give your life to Christ? This God who loves you so much to give your life to Christ. And nobody gives their life to Christ. Not one. I've given this talk, and we've gone through all the intellectual questions, and I answer them to, just down the line, and it's like, how could you not? And wow, this is so incredible. Nobody gives their life to Christ in that talk. So what I've done is what I've said is I'd like for you to go back and listen to those talks if you have those questions, get those answers. Those answers are important. But I want to build on that, and I want to take you to the who, and I want to answer the why with our remaining minutes together. Your soul and your mind craves and needs these two questions of who and why. Your soul needs the who and the why that springboard out of the Genesis 1 far more than it needs the how and the when. Those are important questions. Not saying they're not important. And you should engage God with your intellect. Part of your humanity is intellectual, is your intellect. And you should engage with your whole mind, heart, body, and soul. That's why the word mind is in those verses. We're to engage him with our mind, and we're to get answers to our questions. But not as a way of, God, you better. And God, if you don't, I'm not going to give my life to you. Or as a Christian, we place our faith in Christ and we still have these intellectual questions, and if they're not answered to our satisfactory, we hold back. And we don't like fully engage with the word. And we always have this little bit of a reservation as we read the text. We don't want to go crazy with our Christianity because, I don't want to be known as one of those guys who like fully believes, and we don't wholly sell out to his church because we still have these questions. We need to lay down our humility. We need to lay down our pride and simply take the text for what it is and understand the heart of the author, capital A, author, who is helping us understand what the heart of. So Genesis 1 is fundamentally, you need to understand. Let me just explain why we know that these kinds of things that I've mentioned so far, and then we're going to get to the why. Genesis 1 is fundamentally not the genre of a scientific paper, okay? Genres, poetry, narrative, apocalyptic. There's all kinds of different, you don't read Edgar Allan Poe like you read Harry Potter, okay? Edgar Allan Poe like you read Narnia or Lord of the Rings, right? Those are fiction. And then you don't read biography, right? That's actual true history like you read any other text. We could go down the line, right? You look at the genre and you go, okay, this is fiction, or this is nonfiction, or this is historical biography, and I'm going to read it as such. What we find in Genesis 1 is actually looks more like poetry. It is poetry. And I remember hearing, Genesis 1, why would it be poetry? We find a rhythm, and we find a repetition, and we find rhyme in it. And it says, and on the first day, and then you'll see later on the text, on the second day, and on the third day, and it's about the same number of verses in between. And it's about the same kind of cadence. If you look at the Hebrew, not necessarily the English directly translates the Hebrew. We have all of the Hebrew. But when you look at the Hebrew, you find that right there, and at the end of each one, and it was good. And it was good, and it was good. That's exactly like poetry. And so Genesis 1 is written more like you would in a song. That's where our poetry is today in 21st century. It's in our songs. Those are poems. Those are poetry. And they rhyme, and they if they don't rhyme, then they have a cadence to them to where the words land just right, and there's a little bit of repetition to them, especially in the choruses. And we know poetry, guys. We read poetry and listen to poetry all the time. It's in our songs. And what you have here in Genesis 1 is a song. And what songs tend to do is they elicit emotion. And what he's trying to get at is I'm trying to appeal to your heart because, listen, you are a heart being as much as you're a head being. And I know what turns your soul. And I'm going to answer those core questions that your soul is longing for and would long for if I didn't answer those questions. If all I answered was the how and when, you'd be going, but what about the who and the why? And why didn't he answer the who and the why? Why did he leave that out? And you're probably asking, I just realized you're probably asking, well, why not do both? You already say the Bible is too long. That's why you don't read it. It's too long. I won't get into that big old book. Imagine how big the book would have to be if he made it an instruction manual as to how he did it, right? And so, he knew that you get lost in the details when you start looking at instruction manuals. This is the reason why you don't read instruction manuals and you get lost in your IKEA project, and it's just a wonderful disaster. So, he says, I want to answer the who and the why. And I'm not saying that the how and the when are not important, but I'm going to answer the who and the why because I want your heart and I want you to know, and it would elicit an emotive response. Your soul needs the who and the they that springboard out of the Genesis 1. And here's another thing I want to say before we dive into the why. We should really be reading Genesis 1 as a way to celebrate and to not debate. To celebrate that we know this God. He didn't make himself unknown. He isn't hiding behind the veil like the Wizard of Oz. He's made himself known, and he says, I exist. And listen, I'm the one who made it, and I want to know you. And I made you in relationship, not just simply, we'll get to that in just a second, But we shouldn't be debating. We shouldn't be like, well, I don't really know, and then holding back because we don't think that we have these answers. So back in Genesis 1, he says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Back to good days and bad days as we get into the why for our remainder of our minutes. Back to the good days and bad days. My kids, we get together for prayer at the end of our day together, and we kind of gather around, and funny little detail I added in the first service that's not a part of the illustration really at all, but we've got this, my third born, Noelle, she's an 8 on the Enneagram, we think. You're about to see why in just a second. She wants early bedtime. Now this is weird, and it's not because me and Elizabeth are good parents. Far from it. I promise you. We're gonna pastors' kids, man. Pastors' kids. Okay, and they are pastors' kids. So anyway, she's like, I want bedtime at 8:30, and we've got our boys at 9 o'clock right now. And she knows we always gather together for a little bit of a devotional and family prayer. Okay, and at 8:30, we'll be in the middle of like watching their reward show. We kind of do a reward show at the end of doing your homework and da-da-da-da-da. And so Noelle will stand in the middle of the room and she's like ready for bed. It's full stop at 8:30. She's watching on her iPad or wherever she's looking at. It's at 8:30 and she'll get up and she'll just stand there. Like, I'm waiting. When are we going to do bedtime routine? And anyway, it's funny that we're dealing with that right now. It's a big problem right now. So we're like, pause, okay, because we're like right in the middle of this plot or whatever. And let's do devotional. Turn on the lights and everything. So we do devotional. When we pray, my kids, my number one sentence, the first sentence out of their mouth is this sentence. God, I pray that tomorrow would be a good day. And then they go on with their repetitive prayer. It's only just now changing, but from like 0 to about 13, it's always been, God, dear God, I pray that tomorrow would be a good day. I pray that tomorrow would be a good day, and I pray that tomorrow would be a good day. And we learned pretty quickly that meant video game time. I pray that this would be a lot, that tomorrow would have a lot more video game time than today, or at least we would maximize the number of minutes that we have on video game time. And this was kind of their way of like praying pointed prayer at mom and dad. Like, I would like to have as much video game time as possible. That's what would constitute a good day. Now, here, that sounds. See, let me tell you why some of us have bad days. Because you make your day about yourself. I make my day about myself, if I'm honest. You and I make our day about ourselves. That sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? Because it feels like you're supposed to go, I got to have a good day, and here's what a good day means to me. And so you move into your life, and it's all about you, right? For all of us, it's all about, I want to have the best day that I could possibly have. And listen, that's a lot of pressure for you to bear. Because you go into your day and you're looking for the day to revolve around you. It's got to go my way, right? And it's on me to make it that way. And if it doesn't turn out the way that I want to, then I let me down. And this is actually what's happening in your subconscious more than you think. If you would just think on this a little bit, this is actually what's happening with the self-condemnation that a lot of us live under. And Genesis 1 teaches us it's really all supposed to go around God. And if we would give our hearts over to this text and even lay down our intellect a little bit, not saying those questions don't matter, but give our heart over to this text and go, I know a who, and I know why he did it, then we would realize our days shouldn't revolve around us. And then we just repetitively let ourselves down over and over and over again, and we're really kind of tripping over our own, standards for what a day ought to be, and I better bring that day because it's all about me. We would celebrate and we would go, God, this is all, we would celebrate because, God, this is supposed to go all around you, revolve all around you. God, you're the center of the story. You made it all. And you're outside of all of this creation. Oh my gosh. And I know this eternal being, he wants a relationship with me. Let's flip it around and look at it a different way. There's one day a year that we all make make just about us. Does anybody know what that day is? A birthday, right? And so our birthdays, and we'll say, hey, it's my birthday, be nice to me, it's my birthday, what'd you get me? And did you send me a text? And we do it very nonchalant, and we're kind of like, kind of acting like we really don't care, but we're really kind of like, okay, how many posts did I get on my Facebook page, Instagram, and how many texts did I get? And this is a gauge for how loved I am, and this is how many I got last year, and I even know how many texts I got last year, and now this is how many I'm getting this year, so that's a gauge on how much I'm loved. Listen, it's a day all about us. Imagine if you thought every day was your birthday. Can you imagine how much your family members and friends would hate you? Hate you. Because they just think it's all about them, right? Nobody would want to hang around you. You couldn't have a good marriage. You'd be a terrible father, terrible worker. And it just shows you that logically and relationally and even spiritually, we were not made to make our world about us, to make our days, consecutive days, all about us. If it's about this who, this God, that is revealed to us in Genesis 1 and 2, then a good day is a day that you live for his purpose or his why. And if I lived for his why, if I can lay down my head at night and I live for his why, then that is what defines a good day. If I did that, doesn't matter what circumstances happened to me or what I didn't get accomplished, I live for his day and I can have a satisfaction and it fills my lungs with air. The second question that Genesis 1 answers is why. And the why is this. We celebrate that creation was not only an act of power, act of God's power, but also an act of love. He created for relationship. Love. He created, this is so very important, he didn't create so that we would do for him, so that we would be his slaves. There's a huge contrast to that. He made for love. He didn't make so that we would do for him and be his little minions. He made for the purpose of that we would be with him in oneness. Really, that's the word relationship that is in Hebrew. It's getting at this word oneness, love. We would understand it as unconditional, that's the difference, love, not conditional love. Now, this is important because you and I have never met a human being from any faith or any walk of life that isn't looking for love, that isn't looking for love, unconditional love. Now, what's really important about this who is that this shapes who this who is. It helps us understand that this who is a lover, that God is first and foremost a lover, a being who loves, wants you. Because today we're talking about a who and a why. And why did God do it? Who is God? God is a lover. And the why, right? The purpose, the reason tells us who this who is, right? That he is a lover. Use the faith of Islam, for example. Islam teaches that God is fundamentally power. And having been a missionary or an evangelist, at least in my seminary years, to the Muslim community there, God did not love until he created because there was nothing to love, right? So he is first and foremost power. And in Islam, and this is again a study from a guy who's had to be a missionary to the Muslim world, is this, that Allah is fundamentally power, not love. The relationship to that kind of God is vastly different than the relationship of a God who is both love and power. And love is not subordinate to power with Allah, Yahweh, with the one true God. Love is not subordinate to power, but love is a priori with God's power. God being love and primarily a lover is good news for you and me. It's good news for us who are asking the questions, why am I here? Am I an accident? And did I do it wrong? Am I messing up too much? Can I lose his love? Right? Because we make it about doing. No, you're a product of love. Love that existed before you existed. Let me explain it this way. Look at Genesis 1:26. Later in the chapter, then God said, let us, and that word us, this is so huge, so important because God is identifying himself as a plurality, a community. Let us make mankind. This is Old Testament, not just Old Testament. Like this is like every single human being has read this text or heard this text orally through oral transmission. Adam and Eve heard this. Let us, the Trinity is not just New Testament. Let us make mankind, man in our, and the Hebrew word there is a plural pronoun in Hebrew. both for us and according to our likeness. That's Genesis 1:26. What you see is God has existed in plurality or community since the very, very beginning, and that in his decision, when his decision to create is love. And his decision to create someone out of nothing was an overflow of love between those beings. The analogy that we get actually from the Bible in the New Testament is like marriage. Okay, the best marriages, you know what they do? They don't create children to cure their loneliness. Right? They create children as a product of love. In fact, listen, the desire to create someone to love, that's the heart and the desire. I want children. When an adult says, I want children, right? I'm creating someone to love. And God has given us the biology to do that, and it's just amazing. We begin to understand deeper in a deeper way what it means to be made in the image of God. And what you see in this God, us making this decision to create you and me, or to create mankind, is an answer to the question why. Why are we going to do this? We're going to use our power to bring a life into the world for the purpose of love, relationship, oneness. They don't have to create at all. They could just live in their wholeness, and they're satisfied in and of themselves. They don't need creation to be happy either. They decide to create for the purpose, and they're going to use their power to bring lives into the world to love. You know what? Listen to how powerful that is. Because most of us, our biggest and deepest hurts and our biggest and deepest pains are because we have received a version of love that is conditional. Maybe you had a parent, maybe you had a mom, maybe you had a coach, and you could tell that their love for you, whether they liked you or not, was completely conditional upon whether you did right or did for them. And it goes to the deepest part of your pain and your hurt and some of the stuff that you're still getting over even as an adult. You don't even know why you are the way that you are fully, because you were loved with that and wounded by that same kind of love, conditional love. I love you because, I love you when you do this. I love you if you've done this or that. You've looked for real love, and you've tried to find this unconditional love. And what this tells me fundamentally is that you and I are here because God loves us. And that love is not something that I have to go out and find. That love is something I have to receive, because that's all you can do with unconditional love. When it's conditional, I have to perform for it, right? When it's unconditional love, what can you do? You can't do anything for it. You have to receive it. And love that's really understood, that comes from this being, capital B, right, who made you. The only way that you can really receive it, the only way that you can get it, is if you receive it. And certainly if you read Genesis 1 purely scientifically now, then you and I come out of it like, okay, well maybe, but I've still got questions, and I don't really know. But if you read it as a poem, if you read it as a love song, your heart begins to swell and you realize, I am not an accident. Your heart begins to soar and it begins to say, I'm not a mistake. Wow, maybe this love, maybe the love that I've been looking for comes from God. I've been looking for love in all the wrong places. So look at this. You look for love in all the wrong places because you do not have a who and a why. And what I'd like to do is to just simply give you the opportunity, maybe even with your existing questions that you still have, give you the opportunity to place your faith in a God who loves you so much that he would sacrificially die for you, even though we all walked away from him, you included. And we stayed. If you don't think you would have done what Adam and Eve did, you stayed separated from him, didn't you? You avoided him. You have the same thing in your heart that Adam and Eve had. You stayed separated. I'm going to do whatever I can to discredit or find a reason why I don't, to give you an opportunity to connect with this God who loves you so much and has been pursuing you. So with every head bowed and every eye closed, if that's the desire of your heart, I just want to give you the opportunity to say, you know what? I have a rebellion, and I don't even know if I'd use that word, but a rebellion in my heart that just wants to resist God. Maybe that's a better word. I just naturally resist God. And I resist you, God. Just start talking. You talking to him. I admit that I'm sinful and I'm separated from you. And today, I'm receiving your motions in my direction. You died for me, one of you, because you are an us and you are an our. One of you came to earth and died for me. And I know this based on the historicity of the resurrection. And today, just say this to him, I'm receiving Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior to start a relationship with you. God, I thank you that you've identified yourself as a who. Just say that to him. That you're not just some abstract, distant God, but even though you are eternal, you come down to eye level inside of creation. It's an unbelievable mystery. But you've come down and you meet with me, and you've met with me here today in order to draw me closer to you. Thank you that you love me. Thank you that you want to know me. Thank you that you did not leave me where I am, because you know, oh, how I have resisted you all of my years. Today I am receiving your grace, your love that was paid for at the cross so that I could have relationship, so that I could have oneness with you. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.